Hey, this is Henry Wynn. This is Crash Course U.S. History, and today we'll be learning about the Cold War at home. The Cold War was called cold because supposedly it never actually heated up into any actual conflicts. The Cold War, instead of being a war, was more like an era of conflict between the United States and the USSR, at the time the two most powerful superpowers in the world. They had a conflict of ideologies, with capitalism being faced against communism. There are many different responses to the Cold War. Some people wanted to send out troops to these countries to fight against the spread of communism in what was called the Domino Effect, where people were afraid that countries that became communist would spread that idea to the countries around them. Other people thought that our troops should not be sent to these countries and that they should be sent home instead. One way that the American people could help fight against communism was by donating freedom dollars to an American propaganda campaign called the Crusade for Freedom during the 1950s through 60s. This campaign served to generate domestic support for the American Cold War policies. One person from this era was Senator Joseph McCarthy from Wisconsin. He spread mass hysteria about communists being secretly a part of the government, which caused many people to be scared and caused America's second Red Scare. As you recall from last unit, the Red Scare is when the American public reacts against communism and even deported around 400 people that they suspected to be communists. A committee was even made in the House of Representatives for the purpose of rooting out and convicting these disloyal Americans, and this committee was called the House Un-American Activities Committee, with their slogan being, "Better dead than red." The most famous speech by Senator Joseph McCarthy in 1950 was called the Wheeling Speech. And in this speech, he claimed to have proof of more than 200 communists that worked inside the U.S. government. After this speech, the public went crazy. People who were suspected communists, even with no proof, maybe someone that they didn't like, or just randomly accused, were blacklisted and lost their jobs shortly after. Because of this, many media, books, TV shows were banned because they thought they represented or promoted communism. Examples of this are Robin Hood, who felt that stealing from the rich and giving to the poor was okay, so he must be communist. Some books from Dr. Seuss, such as Yertle the Turtle, who felt that equality was good. The Butter Battle book, and even a baseball team, the Cincinnati Reds, had to change their names. Then time for the mystery document of the day. Okay, this says, "My dear Senator, I read your telegram of February 11th from Reno, Nevada with a great deal of interest, and this is the first time in my experience, and I was 10 years in the Senate, that I've ever heard of a senator trying to discredit his own government before the world. You know that isn't done by honest public officials. Your telegram is not only not true, and an insolent approach to a situation that should have been worked out between man and man, but it shows conclusively that you are not even fit to have a hand in the operation of the government of the United States. I am very sure that the people of Wisconsin are extremely sorry that they are represented by a person who has as little sense of responsibility as you have." Now, if I had to guess, I'm going to assume this document was written by U.S. President Harry S. Truman. Okay, sweet. Now, some of the press agree with Truman that this mass hysteria was not okay and that it was mostly fake. On a different note, because of the conflicts of the Cold War, communism began to spread, even to my home country of Vietnam. With Vietnam was the first time in American history that massive protests were held against the war. In many pictures, men are depicted as burning, throwing away their government-issued military draft cards as a response against the war. Many popular slogans of the time were "Make love, not war," and other pro-peace signs. I would recommend a book called The Wednesday Wars that is based in the 1970s during the Vietnam War, that shows the life of a young 5th grader and his family during the war and gives an accurate depiction of what life was like, and is one of my favorite books. It's called The Wednesday Wars, and yeah, it's good. Also, for the first time in history, veterans coming home protested the war they had just fought in. An example in the early 1970s was U.S. soldier John Kerry, who after the war spoke out against it. He later became the U.S. Secretary of State. One of the most prominent groups to speak out against the Vietnam War was college students. Many college students challenged status quo and refused to conform to red scare challenges to freedom of speech. They represented a new attitude of youthful distrust and lack of respect for authority, which was considered to be unjust. Kent State shooting, 1970. A horrible tragedy occurred in Ohio, where college students protesting the war were shot by the National Guard. 4 were killed and 9 more were wounded. By the 1970s, the Vietnam War had changed America. No longer did Americans trust the government with absolute authority in war. In 1973, Congress passed a resolution that reduced presidential power. After it was discovered that Nixon had been bombing Cambodia without telling Congress, Congress made a new rule that a president must tell Congress about his use of force within 48 hours. In Vietnam, there were many propaganda against Nixon, including this one poster that says, Nixon tên giết người, which translates into Nixon the Killer. At the end of the Cold War, we were the #1 world superpower. We had many different domestic revolutions occurring in our country that happened during this era, such as the Civil Rights Movement, a Vietnam Peace Movement, among many other things. This era changed our country forever, and is a big reason why we are here, why we are what we are today. I would like to thank my high school history teacher, Matthew Vriesman, and everyone else who supported me making this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.